It was my fortune to be for some years among ships with sailors. These have been much in my memory and in my work. I saw the last of the world's great sailing ships, in some ways the finest ever built by man. My memory is mostly of the British full-rigged ships, barks, and four-masted barks of the 1880s and 1890s. Often these were noble things. Some few of them were exquisitely beautiful, with a grace of sheer, of bow and counter that I cannot think of even now without a pang. Nothing lovelier than those lines has ever been made. I saw that beauty at its best when it was contrasted with the spars and the rigging above it. One cannot often see such today. But be very sure that there are ships afloat now infinitely more wonderful and still manned by salts, who are still the salt of the earth. Those ships that I saw daily for so long carried our goods about the world, brought our food and our wealth, and were subject to what is called the fortune of the sea. What that fortune sometimes was, I will try to tell you in stories that were told to me more than 2 generations ago. There was a certain ship's captain who, on his voyage home from a foreign port, was more than usually lonely, and more prone to indulge his loneliness with the rites of an obscure religious sect. In the enthusiasm of this religious feeling, he heard a voice commanding him to break the ship's pump, let water into her, and cause her to be abandoned by her crew. In his enthusiasm, he did not doubt the voice. He put the ship's pump out of action. He let in a certain amount of water, and this was not noticed at the time. But when it was noted, he told the crew to man the pump. And when the pump failed, he said that there was nothing for it but to abandon ship. They were not far from a port. They had ample time to provision and water the ship's boats, and calm weather in which to launch them. They put off and left their ship as she was to sink. That evening, although they did not see it, there came an interference in the plan. A steamer's captain saw the abandoned ship rather low in the water and apparently out of control. He sent a boat to investigate. He found that the ship had been recently left, that the pump could be restored, that the leak could be, and promptly was, caulked, and that the ship with all her freight and all her bunder, and she was a very big, fine ship, was what Sir Francis Drake called a little comfortable dew of heaven, and that the salvage money for bringing such a ship to safety would make them all, in their estimation, rich men. They caulked the leak, they pumped out the water, and passing a line aboard, they towed the ship to safety, to a port. When her crew and captain reached that port the next day, the first thing that they saw was their ship at anchor, secure, and in all ways fit for the sea. The case caused a great sensation among sailors throughout the world, and some indignation to the owners. The captain was for a little time under treatment ashore, and was recommended to give up the sea as a profession, which he did, and the salvors were made rich by the adventure. That is one instance of what I call the fortune of the sea. There was another tale. It was about a steamer of some 3,000 tons approaching the western entrance of the Magellan Straits in a gale. As she drew near to the entrance, making very heavy weather of it, her propeller dropped off, and there she was, helpless, near the great cliffs known as the Four Evangelists, against which a terrific surf was breaking. The captain called all hands and said, "The propeller's gone. I can do nothing. The ship is not under control and with no sails. I shall stay by her whatever happens. But any of you who would like to take the boats can take them. You're welcome." One of the officers said that he would take a boat and run the risk. With great judgment and skill they prepared the boat and safely launched her, with about half the crew on board. What happened to her was never known. She was never heard of again. The ship, with the rest of the crew, drifted nearer and nearer to the surf about the Evangelists. It seemed that nothing could save her. When she seemed to be within 20 yards of the rocks, in the very wet of the backwash, a current plucked her suddenly clear and set her away to the south. The current set them further and further to the south in moderating weather. There they were at last in fair weather, very far from safety or shelter, utterly unable to move the ship, and with no prospect of getting anybody to give them a tow. They could not call for help. It was many years before the days of wireless. The captain had considered that a part of his cargo was in sacks, and that from those sacks, mixed perhaps with tarpaulins, boat awnings, hatch covers, and blankets, a kind of sail might be made. But then how to sew them? And with what could they be sewn? He found that he had on board in all 4 sail needles, and with them the palms by which the sail needles can be used. Then the question of thread arose. Somebody said, "I think, sir, the engineer has usually a hank or 2 of twine." And the engineer said, "Yes, sir, I always indent for twine, but I only ask for 1 hank, and that won't see us very far. It's stuff I hardly ever use." The captain said, "Well, bring up all you've got. Perhaps you have some from the last voyage." The engineer bent down and presently returned. And he said, "You wouldn't believe it, Captain. I indented for only 1 hank. But do you know they've sent me a gross of hanks? 12 dozen, and I never noticed it." The captain said, "Well, now we can make sails." He got the boat awnings, a few tarpaulins that could be spared, and a sufficiency of gunny sacks, and turned the best hands with the needle to the stitching of sails. By the end of the day, the ship was under sail, and next day she was making her course. She wasn't going very fast, but she was going. He did not and could not beat back to the Magellan Straits. He had to go round Cape Horn, which is apt to test a ship's sails. But his luck was in. The weather held, and under his homemade sails he reached the Falkland Islands. He went ashore there, cabled his owners, and asked the local ship repairers their estimate for a new propeller. Those to whom he applied, seeing his predicament, demanded a prohibitive sum. The captain said, "Rather than pay such a sum as that, I'll sail her to Montevideo and try them there." He sent another cable to his owners, asking for a new propeller to be sent there to be fitted. He then sailed the ship to Montevideo, received the new propeller, and having shipped it, proceeded on his voyage.